Candidates for presidency of 74th session of United Nations General Assembly challenged on the tasks ahead.
Nigeria condemns attacks on United Nations peacekeepers in Mali.
And Good Morning Nigeria today focuses on the fight against corruption 4 years on.
The fact that Nigeria has consistently been ranked high in corruption by Transparency International and other anti-graft monitored groups around the world is no longer news. In fact, some watchdogs estimate that close to $400 billion was stolen from Nigeria by corrupt officials between 1980 and 1999, when corruption was at its peak. That money could have been used to develop the nation.
Very true, Blessing. Now, corruption affects, almost all Nigerians negatively, except, of course, those who are corrupt. And the emergence of President Muhammadu Buhari's government in 2015 gave many some hope after he declared war on all forms of corruption, which he identified as a major impediment to the nation's progress. And so far, the fight against corruption has remained one of his priorities.
Quite right, Kingsley. The president's zero tolerance for corruption has drastically reduced the impunity in the country. The federal government's implementation of the presidential initiative on continuous audit has cleaned up the federal payroll as well as the pension systems, saving the country no less than 200 billion naira after the elimination of ghost workers in the civil service.
In fact, Vice President Yemi Osinbajo, while speaking at the summit on corruption last week, said that the administration had successfully tackled ground corruption. That is, the stealing of huge public resources directly from the treasury, as well as the stealing of budgeted funds through various schemes. Now, he identified the wider problem of systemic corruption. That is the type of corruption that affects Nigerians the most, such as the issuance of contracts, licenses, clearing of goods at the ports, and indeed several other areas where many Nigerians, as it were, are forced to pay bribes before they can get what should ordinarily be normal services.
Of course, there are still some undeniable and systemic challenges, and the deep-rooted nature of Nigerians' corruption problem means that it will take time, a whole lot of time, definitely. Even as the president has vowed that the seeds for corruption for a cleaner country. Now, one encouraging thing is that the Corruption Perception Index, ranging from 0 to 100, where 100 represent the cleanest score. Now, see Nigeria at 27%, an improvement from 16% score under the previous administrations.
What is also encouraging is the fact that there are several corruption cases that are being vigorously prosecuted by both the EFCC and the ICPC. Government officials and other persons in the country have been caught. They have also been tried in the courts. Some have been found guilty, and a few, of course, are cooling their heels in jail for criminal breach of trust, gratification, criminal misappropriation of public funds, and other crimes against the laws of the country. Now, that has been, of course, one of the biggest deterrents to many who would otherwise have succumbed to the temptation of misappropriating public funds.
Quite right, Kingsley. Now, according to Chairman Transparency International, Dia Rubio, corruption is much more, that's his quote now, corruption is much more likely to flourish where democratic foundations are weak, and are seen in many countries where undemocratic and populist politicians can use it to their advantage. End of quote. So the questions to be asking this morning will be, so how strong are Nigeria's democratic foundations right now to resist new corruption challenges that may come? Are the country's anti-corruption institutions solid enough to continue the fight without fear or favor? And how can political leaders be part of the solution of corruption in Nigeria?
Blessing, corruption has, in fact, as the saying goes, been fighting back in some cases, and which, of course, has tended in some instances to complicate the fight against corruption. But the truth is that that fight is not that of the president alone. Now, it is the collective responsibility of all Nigerians to rid the country of the plague. So, By what common vision can Nigerians join in the fight to kill corruption at its core? And how can businesses and business owners be part of the solution to the corruption problem in the country?
Kingsley, so many questions for us, and this will be put in before experts as they join us in the course of the program. My name is Blessing Abu. I welcome you to this morning's edition of Good Morning Nigeria. It's the first for the working week, and you're showing live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority, by the way.
I'm Kingsley Osadolo. I join my colleague Blessing in also welcoming you to this edition of the program, in the course of which we shall have regular complimentary segments, and this, of course, will include newspaper review of business and others. In the meantime, let's take the highlights of the morning news, and here is our colleague Elizabeth Morier. Good morning, Elizabeth.
Good morning, Kingsley. Thank you so much, and welcome to the news segment of the program. President Muhammad Buhari has expressed sadness over the loss of lives and property in Zamfara and other parts of the country following banditry and other acts of criminality. He promised not to relent in curbing the disturbing trend for sustainable peace and prosperity of the country, but also bring the perpetrators to justice. This was in Maka while hosting some stakeholders from Zamfara State and other personalities to the breaking of the Ramadan fast.
As a president, he has a lot of responsibility and he needs to seek for Allah's guidance. We know he inherited a lot of problems, more especially on the issue of security. Is what he inherited, issue of economy. The best thing to it is to pray for Mr. President. May Allah continue to guide him and let this administration end of its term, 2023, to be the most successful one.
Meanwhile, candidates vying for the presidency of the 74th session of the United Nations General Assembly are being reminded to sustain the vision of the General Assembly. President of the 73rd session of United Nations General Assembly, Maria Espinosa, threw the challenge during an interactive session ahead of the election.
I now have the honor to give the floor to His Excellency Tijani Mohamed Bande of Nigeria.
Dealing with climate change, terrorism, pandemics, global warming, and related issues in our individual configurations, either as groups or as even countries.
And now to issues of security. Nigeria has condemned in the strongest term the attacks on the United Nations peacekeepers that led to the death of a Nigerian UN peacekeeper in Timbuktu, northern Mali, by unidentified assailants. A statement by the acting spokesperson of the Foreign Affairs Ministry, Friday Akpan, says the attacks, which occurred in separate incidents in Tessalti and Timbuktu, also left 4 other UN peacekeepers, including another Nigerian, injured. While sympathizing with the families of the deceased and the injured, the ministry reiterated the federal government's commitment to continue to support the UN peacekeeping mission in the fight against insecurity in the continent and beyond. And still talking security, Chief of Defense Staff General Gabriel Olonishakin says there's need to strengthen the capacity of officers and men of the Nigerian Navy, given the strategic role of the Navy in combating rising maritime security threats and economic sabotage. General Olonishakin said this at the passing out parade of Batch 28 trainees at the Nigerian Navy Basic Training School on Rivers State.
Other emerging challenges in the maritime domain are piracy in the Gulf of Guinea. I expect you to be courageous, morally upright, and resilient in whatever role you find yourself as part of the ongoing national effort to confront this endemic threat.
Providing decent accommodation and other welfare packages for personnel of the Nigerian military are some of the federal government's strategies at encouraging the fight against insurgency. Towards this end, quarters have been inaugurated by the Akwa Ibom State government at the Wellington Basse Barracks.
At the inauguration of the next tenure, we will do everything possible to put new submersible pumps in those your water projects to make sure you have water.
Meanwhile, an alleged kidnapper and armed robber who recently masterminded the kidnap of the UBEC chairman along Abuja-Kaduna Road is dead, following multiple wounds sustained during an Operation Puff Adder shootout in the early hours of Saturday. In a statement by the police public relations officer Frank Kumba, the shootout took place on the outskirts of Regina village, where the police operatives, in line with the mandate of Operation Puff Adder, were carrying out routine surveillance and raid of suspected criminal hideouts when they were attacked by an armed criminal gang. The police team, however, repelled the attack, bringing the mastermind known as Shaho down while his gang members fled. Shaho was rushed to the hospital where he eventually died. Now to other matters, no effort will be spared to restore Ibadan Airport to its pride of place in order to contribute its quota to the socio-political and economic development of the Southwest and the nation at large. Minister of State Aviation, Hadi Sirika, gave this assurance while inaugurating the remodeled terminal building of the airport in Ibadan.
What Kaduna is to the north, what also Enugu is to the east, as well as Bini, the south-south, that is what Ibadan is to the west. We cannot grow bigger and can't run faster than our fathers.
Still on infrastructure, the federal government is to build an agro-allied cargo terminal at the Benin airport to boost economic activities in the state. The Minister of State for Aviation, Hadi Sirika, disclosed this while inaugurating the newly installed night landing facility to enable the airport commence night operations.
And in addition to this one that you've seen, which is the ground-based equipment, we have also satellite-based equipment that we put for Bini in such a way that even if this one fails, the one in the satellite will now work.
With this air transportation infrastructure, it will just complement a lot of the other efforts that we are making currently in the area of agriculture, in the area of industrialization, in the area of tourism and culture, and even education.
And that's the news for now. Good Morning Nigeria continues with Blessing and Kingsley after the break.
If you just joined us, the program is Good Morning Nigeria. Macroeconomic policy analyst commends President Muhammadu Buhari for reappointment of Godwin Emefiele as Governor of Central Bank of Nigeria. Let's join Joy Uzo for details in our business package.
It's good to have you join us on Business News. Now, some analysts who spoke to Business News on the recent reappointment of Godwin Emefiele as CBN governor, while giving suggestions on areas for improvement, did not mince words in applauding the decision. Professor Ken Ife, who has been closely monitoring Nigeria's economic policies and programs, said President Buhari has rewarded the CBN governor with another 5-year term based on the fact that the CBN has really been instrumental to the financial stability Nigeria presently enjoys. He emphasized that the CBN governor and his team displayed economic leadership, which includes economic framework with series of intervention programs with special reference to Anchor Borrower Scheme and the SMEs access to finance with a 4 trillion naira window cash reserve ratio back lending. Among other things, the analyst said earned Emefiele another term is risk-based supervision approach the CBN adopted in putting the financial system under scrutiny, maintaining the inflation rate at almost single digit coupled with stability in the forex market despite the turbulence in the global economy occasioned by the trade war between China and the USA. Professor Ife remarked that Emefiele deserves the reappointment. However, it calls for a broader room for improvements.
To continue the leadership and strengthen their macroeconomic leadership so that many more policyholders will key in and work in. Your debt management office, for example, is working in rebalancing the foreign and domestic debt. Then you have fiscal policy that should get more in line and do budget releases in good time to support there are many others that will have to key in so that they work as a team according to the EIGP plan. So that's the leadership that we have to get them to strengthen
and help, and then get the banks to use more of the resources that they have.
In the meantime, an entrepreneur, Marcel Ezewunye, has called for more equity finance options as part of the model to scale up activities of MSMEs in the country. Taking a cue from the positive impact of programs such as the Anchor Borrowers scheme of the CBN, which has engaged more Nigerians, Marcel believes that this gesture should be extended to those who are really involved in food production processes to boost exports.
You will have enough money to sustain what we are doing without necessarily borrowing from banks who ask for a lot of things in terms of collateral as well as high interest rates.
And to stocks, a review of activities for the week ended May 17, 2019 shows that the total turnover of 1.172 billion shares worth 17.887 billion naira in 18,380 deals were traded by investors on the floor of the Nigerian Stock Exchange. The NSE All-Share Index and market capitalization appreciated by 0.08% and 17.29% to close the week at 28,871.93 and 12.717 trillion naira respectively. Experts in stocks believe that this positive outlook witnessed in the week under review was greatly influenced by the listing of a major telecommunication giant to the Nigerian Stock Exchange, and if other such organizations follow suit, will greatly improve the nation's equities markets. And on that note, we wrap business news. I am Joy Uzo saying thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Joy Uzo, for the business package. Next for us on the program is a review of the front pages of some of today's newspapers.
Let's join in welcoming Bayo Toyobe to the studio for today's edition. Good morning, Bayo.
Good morning, Blessing. Good morning, Kingsley. Good morning, Nigeria.
All right, Bayo, good to see you.
Thank you.
Blessing, we'll begin with you.
Okay. All right, I'll start off with the Daily Sun. Just beside the earpiece for the Daily Sun, we have local government joint accounts. And we have a call NFIU to order governors urge Buhari. NFIU, of course, stands for Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit. Leading for the Daily Sun this morning, Senate leadership tussle gets messy. The two riders, their allegation of arrest plot before inauguration unsettles National Assembly. Ndume Lawan's camp in intense lobby over voting method. And just beside the photograph there, we have federal government's alleged security breach plot diversionary. This is coming from the People's Democratic Party. And the rider, Atiku, demands 500 million naira apology from Buhari's aid. Boko Haram, Kika Fani Kayode tackles Lamido over Obasanjo. Quickly to the leadership. Still the story on the NFIU's. We have governors move against NFIU's monitoring of joint accounts, with two riders seek PMBs as President Muhammadu Buhari's intervention, and states urged to adopt federal budgeting model. Kingsley.
All right, let's take a look at the front page of the Nigerian Tribune. In Nigerian Tribune, lead story says, governors reject local government accounts monitoring by NFIU. Governors reject local government accounts monitoring by NFIU. Want Buhari to call it to order, that is to call the NFIU to order. Details of the story can be found on page 2. Immediately below that is a headline, Navy unlawfully detained 40 Nigerians in underground cells and vessel. Falono, writes Buhari. That's on page 6. Now, below the nameplate of the Tribune, Dangote named amongst greatest leaders, that's page 6. On page 4, defamation, Atiku demands 500 million naira damages and apology from Buhari's aid. And NNPC to inaugurate largest LPG storage in Edo. Details on page 11. Above the nameplate, 2 headlines, weak institutions will continue to hinder economic growth. That's an economic analyst, Bismarck Rewane, that's on page 11. Nigeria saves 288 billion naira from rice importation. And that story is attributed to the CBN governor. And to the Punch newspaper, just above the nameplate, we'll take 3 headlines there before we go to bio. NNPC removes NPDC boss and 49 others in major shakeup. That's on page 49. And defamation story is also there. Atiku demands 500 million naira, an apology from Buhari's aide. NFIU guidelines on local government funds illegal, say governors. That's on page 14. And I can't account for security votes within 7 days, as attributed to the outgoing governor of Nasarawa, Al-Makura. And outgoing lawmakers move property out of National Assembly. Wow.
Interesting. Let's start with the Nigeria Financial Intelligence Unit. It may be recalled that the unit provided a ceiling, particularly with the quantum of money that can be withdrawn from the local government account. Otherwise, the rest have to be done by electronic transfer and through checks. And this is part of the Financial Intelligence Unit measures to check possible abuses within the state and local government account. But state governors are saying it is illegal, and the chairman of the Governors Forum, outgoing chairman of the Governors Forum, said they will take it to the doorstep of Mr. President to intervene. Meanwhile, the focus of the nation is on inauguration, and with barely 9 days to inauguration, to the second term of Mr. President, Daily Trust has reported that 70% of members of the federal cabinet are already lobbying to return to the cabinet. There are indications that ministerial list will be sent to the Senate immediately after inception of the Senate. And other indication is that those who are already lobbying include APC members who lost gubernatorial elections as well as senatorial elections as a way of compensation. And the paper indicates that there is a likelihood that there will be 37 ministers plus 6. 37 in the sense that 1 from every state of the Federation and FCT, and 6 others more, 1 from each geopolitical zone. There's also a likelihood of unbundling the Power, Works and Housing Ministry, while aviation is also likely to be extricated from Transportation Ministry. There are also speculation that the president will likely relinquish his hold as petroleum minister, and there will no longer be a minister of state for petroleum. Another source say no one, in fact, knows the mind of the president. A special Federal Executive Council is to hold today. They will look at memos and projects, while on Wednesday, a validatory session will hold. Subsequently, there will now be a dissolution of the cabinet some days after. In Lagos, too, the governor in waiting says the notorious Apapa gridlock will be resolved within 60 days of his inauguration. The governor-elect Babajide Sanwo-Olu says the sessions he said this at a session with his alumni of the Executive Masters in Business Administration in Lagos. He said, I believe it is something that we are going to solve in the first 60 days. He said, there is a lot of politics played around there, but no, we cannot continue to give excuses. In the long term, Badagry Port will be developed to serve as another entry to ease Apapa. By May 29th, we will tell His Excellency the Governor, you are on, and by July 28, 2019, 60 days, we'll see whether Apapa gridlock is still there or it has disappeared.
Well, that story is at the foot of or is on the front page there at the foot, but you can actually find the story in more greater details on page 44 of the Daily Sun, just as you have pointed out. Okay, to other...
I think it's sometimes advisable not to set deadlines on some of the intractable problems that we have. If you recall, I think that was during Fashola's tenure as governor, the federal government and the state government mobilized, and they cleared up the traffic within a short while. But thereafter, the problem resurfaced. Because the problems are usually also from within the ports themselves, plus, the poor state of the roads. Someone who is making this promise now, when you just head into the rainy season, you know how terrible the rains can be in terms of maintenance of the roads in and around the Apapa area. There are many potholes because the drainages have been blocked and clogged over time. So let's see. We encourage him to see if he clears it within 60 days. The clearing must be permanent.
Exactly, not just to go for some few days and resurface, like you pointed out. Okay, to other stories. The leadership, let's return to the leadership. Just below the nameplate, we have the story. Federal government rakes in 393.7 billion naira from VAT as value-added tax in 4 months. And Ryder spends 37.54 billion naira on foreign loans. More details on page 7. Okay, let's move further down the paper. Benin Airport to begin night flight. More details on that story on page 25. And why it's difficult to prosecute vote buyers. Page 23 will let you into that. Kidnappers trail victims to Nasara villages. And already we've taken that story article threatening the PMB's aid with 2 billion naira libel suits. I think the other one reported 500 billion naira. Okay, Kingsley.
Okay, let me take some stories from The Punch. The lead story of The Punch newspaper says governors neglect health care as state hospitals rot away. You can find some of the photographs on the front page, but we'll jump that very quickly and go right to the foot of the Punch newspaper. Right there, we'll take one of those stories from the foot of the front page of the Punch. It says, police will neutralize Ubek chairman's abductor and arrest 6 suspects. That story can be found in greater detail on page 5. Bayo.
Yes, police have actually, on their onslaught on kidnappers, they have neutralized the alleged mastermind of the persons who kidnapped on April 29, that was the chairman of the Universal Basic Education Commission and the daughter. He was identified as Sumela Sule, and he has a nickname, Shaho. Shaho is a legendary wrestler in Hausa land, and so he took that name to mystify, to create a kind of myth about himself. And he actually, when the police were going on a routine check there, he was first to fire on them, and in the shootout, eventually he was neutralized. He also arrested 4 members of his gang, and incidentally, all of them are said to be natives of Regina. And that means a strong link for that kidnapping along that Kaduna-Abuja expressway has been needed in the world. Also in Owerri, an alleged deadly kidnapper, an armed robber, his name is said to be Nzube Anaogu. He is better known as Italia. He was arrested at Owerri. Punch also reported that there were jubilation in Owerri when the news came that the notorious kidnapper has been arrested. He's said to belong to the gang of the kidnap king Johnson Igwedibia, who was neutralized sometime last year. He was known as Don Wani. They said he had been on wanted list for a long time. And the Imo State Police Command says that they have now rejuvenated their task force and they are prepared to deal and eliminate all the criminal squads in that place. Victims of the alleged suspect have been trooping to police headquarters to give evidence of his, especially those that are fallen victims of his exploits. Talking about the story that you read about value-added tax,
yes,
there is some positive development by way of economic news. Yes, VAT, Nigeria has raked in about 393.7 billion from VAT in 4 months. However, when it comes to internally generated revenue, the target was 128.67, at least between those first 4 months. But a little short of that. What was got was 100.7 billion. Meanwhile, Nigeria's external reserves too is now $45 billion. This was reported as the 8-month high, and central banks records show that it rose from 44.7 billion by May 22nd, and within the short period of May 22nd and May 16th, a period of 14 days, another 45.7 billion came in.
All right,
Bayo, just Blessing, before you take the editorial, I mean, there's some very sweet news from Benin. We actually had that story in our bulletin with regard to the installation of navigational aids for night flights. It's a welcome development. That airport in Benin is over 60 years old. Over 60 years old, one of the oldest airports in the country. And one has to ask the question, why it took this long. So it's commendable that, this is taking place now. Perhaps other things that we need to do will be to extend the runway so you can, have higher capacity aircraft that are landing there, that can land there. I think the 737 is probably the max that they can take now. And there's also been encroachment in and around that airport, for quite a while. So getting our airports to function at night, it's something that we have to work at. Kano has that facility, Port Harcourt, and of course, Lagos has always had it. That way, people can travel virtually around the clock.
And not only that, the location of Benin makes it an alternative airport for Lagos, Port Harcourt, and surroundings. Particularly if there's any challenge, it becomes an alternative airport. But the location there, right in the city, is a problem. That is why the encroachment is becoming a challenge.
So those are indications of what to look out for.
It was called the aerodrome.
Yes.
I mean, from aerodrome to airport, it's development that's crowded around it.
Okay, I'm sure more things are looking out for Benin airports as well as other area states that will be looking into that. Okay, to other states, attraction in terms of investment. Yeah. The editorial today is taking a look at Ondo State as the hotbed for Indian hemp cultivation in Nigeria. It's tagged Akeredolu's Indian hemp idea.
Well, in fact, last week we discussed this on Good Morning Nigeria, and we said we didn't want to be seen as proponents for popularizing Indian hemp. But then, since the governor muted the idea, on the social media, he has come under attack. And one of those who condemned it, in fact, is a senator, and they've said that looking at the extent to which there's drug abuse among the youth, it is not an advisable thing. But the governor knows what he's doing, because he had gone on a trip with the chairman of the NDLEA, and they went to Thailand, and he has found out that if properly managed, between now and 2025, Nigeria can rake in about 145 billion from medicinal cannabis cultivation. Exactly. And therefore, the proposal from the way he has seen it is that it's going to be a kind of medicinal marijuana operation. And the plantation is going to be controlled, supervised by the Nigerian Drug Law Enforcement Agency. It's not going to be all commerce affair. Those who cultivate it will have to have a point of sale where it is, and it's going to be controlled. And so that it will become an alternative source of revenue for Ondo State. However, those who are against it are saying that the governor should look at alternatives, particularly that Ondo State is quite rich in cocoa, Owena, and so they could devote his attention and initiative and efforts towards improving cocoa so that it can grow rather than dipping his hands into the danger of cannabis. Ondo State is reputed for, in fact, it has the largest cultivation of Indian hemp legally now, which they are trying to make
well, like we've already pointed out, for medicinal developments, that will be awesome, because some developed countries already are cashing a big time on this as well. Okay, that'll be it, Bayo. Thank you for
economic diversification.
There's always a means to diversify, Kingsley. Okay, thank you very much, Bayo, for joining us tomorrow. We'll see you again tomorrow. All right, then. You're watching Good Morning Nigeria. We'll take a quick break. When we return, it will be time to take a look at our discussion, taking a look at anti-corruption and at present administration. 4 years on, how far so far? Welcome back. Before we get to introduce our guest, let's begin this conversation. And here's this background report put together by Abdul Malik Adiu.
One of the mandates that heralded the President Muhammadu Buhari administration in 2015 was the fight against corruption, or anti-corruption crusade. This has recorded significant impact with viable government anti-corruption policies, legal frameworks, and the will to strengthen and empower its anti-corruption agencies and the role of the judiciary in handing down sentences on those convicted. The hard stance of government on corruption is said to be gaining investors' confidence with the introduction and adoption of homegrown anti-corruption policies, such as the whistleblower policy, the enforcement of the Treasury Single Account, the Code of Conduct Bureau, and its tribunal, among others. The federal government whistleblower policy was introduced in 2016 and is geared towards enabling patriotic citizens to report criminal acts such as mismanagement or misappropriation of public funds and assets inimical to the growth and development of the country. According to the government, the aim of the policy is to increase exposure of financial crimes, improve level of public confidence in public institutions, and enhance transparency as well as accountability in the management of public funds. Since the launch of the policy, the acting chairman of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, Ibrahim Magu, says the agency had recovered over 527 billion naira, $53 million, and 123 million pounds through the policy. The Treasury Single Account, TSA, a public accounting system using a single account or a set of linked accounts by government to ensure all revenue receipts and payment are done through a consolidated revenue account at the Central Bank of Nigeria, was adopted from the previous government. Experts say the policy has helped the present administration to curb excesses in government income and expenditures in the ministries, departments, and agencies for accountability and transparency in public funds management. The public outcry that the judiciary is equally engrossed by corruption saw the searchlight of the anti-graft war moved to the judicial arm with the arrest of some judges under a sting operation carried out by men and officers of the DSS. Experts say the Buhari's anti-corruption war has become a brand and a model to other African countries, evident with the recent acknowledgement of President Muhammadu Buhari by African Union as a champion of anti-corruption fight in Africa. 5 years on, what are the successes recorded in the fight against corruption so far? What does the future portend for the federal government anti-corruption crusade? These are questions yearning for answers on Good Morning Nigeria.
All right, thank you very much, Abdul Malik Adio, for that background. Now we have guests with us on the studios, and hopefully we'll also be joined by another guest from one of our network centers. But in the meantime, let's welcome Professor Bolaji Owasonye, who is Chairman, Independent Corrupt Practices and Related Offences Commission, ICPC. Professor Owasonye, a pleasure to have you with us on the program this morning.
Good morning.
Also here with us in the studios is Professor Sadiq Rada. He's Executive Secretary of the Presidential Advisory Committee on Anti-Corruption, PACAC. Professor Rada, pleasure to have you with us again on the program.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Okay.
Okay. I thought you would do the honor of introducing the last guest. Also part of this discussion this morning, we'd like to welcome Kabir Latono. He's the Assistant Director, Legal Department, Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Latono.
Good morning. Thank you.
Okay. Now, if we were to use the base year of 2015, the first question to ask is how far will the fight against corruption?
Okay, thank you very much. I think that it is safe to say that we're not where we used to be. We're not particularly where we ought to be, but it would be unfair and uncharitable to say that we are where we were in 2015. First of all, there is a high level of consciousness about what corruption has done to us. The president had taken the unprecedented step of, for example, exposing corruption in defense sector. This is something that hardly has happened in any country because that sector is usually, but because of the effect, the president opened up that sector. We've seen a clearer understanding in terms of approach for asset recovery, which is one of the major measures for tackling corruption globally. Because where you have systemic and endemic corruption, especially in the digital economy, assets move very fast, okay? And tracing and being able to hold offenders down is a bit more difficult. But Nigeria has escalated and really grounded that principle, especially in Africa, that asset recovery is a major component of the fight against corruption and all that. Thirdly, President Buhari has been able to put strong political will behind the measure of improving the situation with regard to diminishing corruption in revenue and expenditure side of government. In the revenue side of government, you know that before MDAs earned money and just they had hundreds of accounts and did what they liked with it, the president pulled all that money into the TSA and was able to run the economy. If there had been no TSA, there had been no fight against corruption, I think we all agree that the situation in Nigeria would have been much worse than it is. The fourth thing, of course, as we know, is the expenditure side. Government has made stronger use with more determination of the expenditure component of MDAs by reviews of how MDAs spend money and all that. The last angle that I'll just talk about is about sanctions and enforcement. We have seen that the sanctions and enforcement regime has cut across arms of government. So it's not just a focus on the executive, there's been a focus on legislature, there's been focus on the judiciary. So broadly speaking, there's a high level of consciousness about the fight against corruption and the impact of corruption against the system. But like I said, nobody would say that we're on cruise level, we're comfortable with where we are, but we know that we've moved from where we used to be. There's a high level of consciousness and caution, I think, around the whole issue of corruption.
Thank you very much, Professor Wasonyi. Let's get Professor Rada's views. It made mention of something, what corruption has done to us as a nation. And for everyone, there is the belief that it's something that is now being accepted, or at least a way of life before these onslaughts from 2015. Do we still realize the import of what corruption is doing to us as a nation?
Well,
and where are we really?
No, certainly you can say that Nigerians are quite aware, either directly or indirectly, regarding the consequences of corruption. Today, people complain of lack of basic amenities, and we should be able to link the shortage of these amenities to something. Among all the variables that you will identify and examine and discuss regarding the miserable condition Nigerians find themselves, if you want to be fair, you will say that corruption is at the top of the ranking. If you can't get water, electricity, medical care, education, good roads, you know, if things are not working, you have to explain it using certain variables. In Nigeria, we believe, to start with, you have to eradicate corruption before you can blame any other variable regarding the problems we are facing in Nigeria. All this kidnapping, armed robbery, militancy, etc., are as a result of the inability of people to get what they deserve. By the time corruption is minimized, you know, the resources are allowed to flow fairly and equitably, then possibility is many of the social problems we are confronting as a nation are going to fizzle out. But so long as a tiny few in this country will corner the resources of the country for themselves at the expense of the lives of other people, then there can be peace. There can be stability. Because somehow people have to survive. People either survive legitimately or illegitimately. And with corruption, people will have to innovate ways of making sure they survive because the system has not accommodated their demands. So I must say that Nigerians are becoming aware that corruption does not pay. Corruption has consequences. Consequences for those who are looting and consequences for the majority of the population. Therefore, eradicating corruption is a win-win situation for everybody. The government will fight it. If it is done successfully, the elite benefit, the poor people benefit. Why? Because the elite will live in peace, sleep with their two eyes closed, the common man will get what they deserve. But in a situation where the resources are cornered, as we see it happening over time, the possibilities there will be rebellious tendencies as we are seeing today.
All right, Professor Rada, thank you very much. But still pursuing the sociological perspective on anti-corruption, let's bring in now Kabir Latona, who is Assistant Director of Legal Department of the EFCC. Of course, your jurisprudence would have read aspects of the sociology of law. what, in your opinion, that's to say from the perspective of the EFCC, is playing out now in the Nigerian environment? As Professor Wasson said, there's an increased consciousness as to the negative impacts of corruption, but he also says that there is some restraint, in terms of what used to be the audacity in simply raiding the treasury. What has the EFCC found?
Thank you very much. What the Commission has discovered is that, and as it has been echoed by the acting chairman times without number, is that fighting corruption is not akin to taking chocolate from a kid. Corruption worldwide is an insidious crime. It's something which is very, very difficult to fight. And like Prof rightly pointed out, in Nigeria it is both systemic and systematic. And when you have such a situation, it becomes an appalling tax. One of the issues, the obstacles, has been the criminal justice system. Happily, in 2015, there were some innovations. The Administration of Criminal Justice Act 2015 came into being, which introduced a lot of innovations. You have this idea of lawyers coming in with various kinds of applications to stall criminal trials and what have you. And this legislation brought in some innovations which have been tested in the courts. If you look at the case of Saraki versus Federal Republic of Nigeria, the issue of application for stay, which has been prohibited by the Act, was judicially tested as far as the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court has pronounced on the justiciability of that particular provision. We could use a case study with that of the current the House of Reps member who is being prosecuted by the ICPC for collecting certain amount of dollars from a particular Nigerian, Mr. Otedola. The case now, to my knowledge, has suffered substantial adjournments and has gone through almost 3 or 4 judges. Nigerians out there will be wondering why. That's a simple case of corruption, somebody you captured or electronically receiving these items. How come that the issue has not been resolved? So these are some of the legal obstacles embedded within the criminal justice system. That's one aspect. Then secondly, too, you have the societal perception towards issue of corruption. It's in this country we've had a situation whereby a former governor of a particular state, an attempt to arrest him was resisted by members of his community. And it's actually ironic that the money which should have been used for the betterment of that community and which was lawfully acquired by these individuals, and it is these same individuals who should have benefited from the resources who are actually preventing him from facing justice. And it had to take a foreign nation to prosecute this particular person before he could be declared a convict. So basically, we can see the contradiction. Something affects you, but paradoxically, you are shielding that particular person from prosecution. Then again, the cost of prosecuting corruption cases is quite high. I've used the House of Reps members case as an illustration. This is a case that has moved for about 2 to 3 years now. The cost of that 2 to 3 years, if we are to quantify it, let's assume you hire an SAN to prosecute the person. One can imagine what the bill of such an SAN would be. The cost of bringing witnesses, the cost of investigation. So corruption itself is an expensive project to fight. When this particular former governor that I spoke about was being prosecuted by the British government, a lot of money, which is almost equivalent to the budgets of state governments in Nigeria, was invested in the prosecution. That shows us that corruption is an expensive project, both in terms of investigation and prosecution. The subsidy cases, as an illustration, is multi-agency. You will have to contact NNPC, you will contact Ministry of Finance, you contact CBN, MPA, and PPRA, and all the relevant agencies involved. One can imagine the duration, the cost, the witnesses, and then again, the peculiar Nigerian environment. A lot of our people are impatient in the issue concerning corruption. What they believe is that immediately the person is arrested, it should be dealt with. But again, we have the law there that says every person is innocent until he is pronounced guilty by the law court. So all these processes combined and all other factors are there which affects the fight against corruption.
Well, that's fine. Actually, part of the question I was asking, still on the foundational level, had to do with perception, and then, of course, the reaction of the Nigerian populace. Do you have the numbers from the EFCC, whether or not now you are making more arrests or people are more restrained on account of the fact that EFCC, ICPC, and indeed the entire judicial system is now up and against corruption?
Well, within the past couple of, if I use 2019 as an analogy, between January and May 15, 2019, the EFCC has made substantial arrests. We commenced an operation that we called it Operation Cyberstorm. And virtually everybody, if you go through the dailies, you would have been aware of the number of arrests that has been made all over the Federation. And within that period, a number of Nigerians involved in internet scam have been arrested, have been prosecuted, have been convicted, and scam illicit properties have been confiscated and have even been returned back to victims of foreign nations involved. People out there believe that, oh, it's just Yahoo boys, but they don't seem to understand that the kind of internet scam we are having now is a kind of reinvigorated, in quotes, refined internet scam, wherein these boys are engaging in what is known as CEO, BEC internet scam, business executive compromise, hacking into the emails of multinational nations, intercepting their mails, and as a result, being able to manipulate their financial transactions, which they now transmit through their allies in various nations and eventually launder into Nigeria. So it's not the ordinary kind of Yahoo as we used to know it then. The one we are having now is a much more pronounced. And this is why within the past couple of months, the Commission too, in relation to that resurgence, has gone out full force. So we've made substantial arrests. We are still making substantial arrests. As of last week, 28 persons were arrested by our office in Ibadan. The Abuja zonal office too made substantial arrests on Friday. So almost on a weekly, daily basis, we are arresting people involved in various kinds of economic and financial crimes. And besides, many Nigerians, because they believe in the capacity of the Commission, keep bringing in petitions on a daily basis across the 14 zonal offices of the Commission, as well as the head office in Abuja, and we are treating them.
All right, Kabir Latono, thank you very much. Listen.
All right, thank you, Kingsley. And also, Mr. Latono, thank you. So many pointers from your contribution there. Let's get back to Professor Owasoye. Sometime last week, yes, which was part of our introduction to when PACAC, of course, hosted the event and the VP was there, there was something that said something that the struggle against corruption is that for the soul and also substance of our nation. Definitely, there are systems, institutions such as yours, EFCC, as well as other aspects under the judiciary system, is looking out to taming corruption to the barest minimum. But it will appear in what also dealt with earlier, Rubio said corruption is more likely to flourish where democratic foundations are weak. What are we up against with our various institutions in fighting corruption, really? How strong are they for what fight that is facing us?
Okay, when we say that corruption is systemic, it means everything is affected.
Definitely.
The capacity of anti-corruption agencies is affected. Their infrastructure to fight corruption is affected. The institution that you need, like the judiciary, to help is affected. The agencies, multi-agency investigation that you have to conduct is affected. So when you do big ticket corruption investigation, for example, you need all manner of agencies to cooperate. If there is breach in one of them, the case can fail. You just gave an example of the subsidy case. You have an NPCC, BN, PPRA, finance. If somebody along that chain refuses to give you critical evidence that you want or documents, you struggle. Now, when we say corruption, people don't understand the whole idea about systemic corruption. Systemic corruption means the thing has eaten so deeply. People's values, understanding, everything has been badly affected. So it's like driving against traffic. Everybody is going in one way, and you say, no, that's not the way to. I'm going to drive. The propensity for accident is very high, okay, because you are the one saying, no, we will not continue in that direction and all that. So we have to understand what we're dealing with here. So, for example, I'm not under illusion that anti-corruption agencies have also been affected by corruption over the years. And when President Buhari came with the agenda, you have to then start unpacking, separating the wheat from chaff. And that's why I said at that meeting that wherever corruption is systemic, enforcement measures alone cannot work. It's not possible, okay? And even though you make significant inroads and milestones, they'll be like drops of water in an ocean. So you've got to combine your approach. You do enforcement measures because you need to send the signal that crime does not pay. And you have to focus on big fish to make that point. Secondly, you must do a lot of prevention measures to diminish the propensity of people who are the victims of corruption, frustrating your effort to fight corruption. Because when it comes to corruption, there are many default lines and fault lines that Nigerians can use. If they don't use a party, ethnic, religion, community, they can use anything to say, is this the only one? If in this room, I choose to prosecute anybody here for an infraction, and I evaluate my capacity to do so, I would decide who to start with. That is not to say the others are innocent, but I could choose to start with you. Now, your defense cannot be, why me? Is it because I'm a woman? You should say I'm innocent and prove it. Not be saying, oh, start with Kingsley. Why not start with Professor Rada? How can that be a defense? But the reality is that as an anti-corruption agency, your budget is limited. The number of investigators you have are limited. Your prosecutors are limited. You are going to have to deal with the courts. I was in a meeting last week where in one country, the anti-corruption agencies were able to convince the government that they needed more resources for their operatives. So the government approved it. The judges, the judiciary in that country who were observing felt so offended, but they didn't say anything. They said, okay, we will see. And when cases were taken to the court, an African country, when cases were taken to the court, they frustrated all the cases. Now, the chief prosecutor who was appointed, who made the case to the government, they then said to him that, oh, you think you are the only one who can fight corruption. We will see how you will win, Now, how do you explain that? How do you explain that? So what we are saying is that when we are talking about systemic corruption, the implication is that everything, that's why this government says that corruption is an existential issue for us. We've seen what it has done to us, unless people want to be pretentious. And the people who are being pretentious are a vocal, well-resourced minority. They're the people who are benefiting from corruption. Corruption cost Nigeria almost a whole geopolitical zone until Buhari came to diminish that. Many local governments were gone because corruption had deeply entered the defense sector. Corruption is now, today we are talking about a whole highway being blocked in broad daylight. All those people who are there, why is the police and the other security agencies, where are they weakened to be able to do? Even if there's a will, where is the money? Okay? And even if you have the money, you have the will, has the capacity of those to do the job been built over time? There are all manner of things. So you've got to understand that when we say that corruption is an existential issue for Nigeria, it's crawling gradually, and people can begin to see. I give one example, and then I shut up. I always say to people that if a governor or a minister stole money meant to build a school anywhere in Nigeria, let's say $1 billion, and you start pursuing the guy, eventually you get him 10 years after. First of all, you are not likely to get all the $1 billion he stole. If you succeed in getting the 1 billion, let's say you succeed, will you be able to build the schools 10 years later? If you build the schools, what about the students who have dropped out of school in the 10-year period, who have joined either Boko Haram, kidnappers, because they had no opportunities, okay? Will your 1 billion, if you get it back, will it de-radicalize them? Even the implications are myriad. So people need to understand that corruption has victims, and that if you don't deal with it, you can, if you are very rich, you can delay the effect of corruption on yourself. You can only delay it. You cannot prevent it. You can get more security for yourself, build a higher fence, but all those things are temporary measures. It will get to you.
All right, Professor Bolaji Owason, thank you very much. You said you were going to shut up, but we'll still have you, come on again in the course of the conversation. We did say that we're going to be joined by another guest from of our network centers, and we're going over now to Benin, where the Reverend David Ugolo is joining us. He's Executive Director of the African Network for Environmental and Economic Justice. He's also an anti-corruption and asset recovery expert. The Reverend Ugolo, a pleasure to have you with us on the program this morning.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Well, let's have your take on the first round of questions that we asked. Using 2015 as a baseline, 4 years later, what is your view on the fight against corruption in Nigeria?
Again, thanks, sir. First, we must acknowledge the fact that this government have put anti-corruption fight as a priority. That, again, has helped strengthen the fight against corruption in Nigeria. The fact that the government came into power on the basis of the fact that they recognize that corruption is a huge problem and is an obstacle to development is something that we must also commend the government for. And in terms of assessing the government where we are with the fight against corruption, there are two things we must recognize. First, that the government recognizes the fact that corruption is a huge problem is something we must commend the government for. Then two is about mobilizing the people to also support the fight against corruption. Because fighting against corruption is not what government alone can do. You need the people, you need the system, you need the international community, particularly on the grand corruption we're talking about. The corruption that is actually affecting Nigeria is not just the small petty corruption, but we have huge corruption in the country. And that, for me, is something that we must also recognize, that in terms of asset recovery, which this government have demonstrated that there is level of transparency and accountability. For instance, the Abuja 2 that has happened, the $322.5 million that was recovered from the Swiss government that is currently being disbursed across the entire country is the first of its kind in this part of the world. And that, for me, is something that is remarkable. First time poor people in Nigeria are seeing the benefit of fighting corruption. You're seeing money recovered from previous leader going to the very poor people in Nigeria is the first time it has ever happened in the continent, and today is a model around the world. And for me, it's something that we must continue to encourage. Are they doing well? Well, that's another issue entirely. But within the framework of tackling corruption that has affected this country, we must realize that it's not just one man fight alone. We must all build the coalition around fighting corruption. Just give you an instance how fighting corruption is very dangerous in this part of this world. Now, NFIU, the new agency that is tackling financial corruption in this country, came up with a regulation to ensure that the poor people across Nigeria get the monthly allocation that goes to the local government. You can see how the governors are ganging up across the entire country to undermine this agency. Now, state governors want their money to come to them, but they don't want the money to go to the local government. How do you ensure development? Substantial part of money that comes to this country go to the local government. But you can see how governors across the entire country, irrespective of the political party, whether you are a PDP or you are APC, they are ganging up to undermine this agency. So we Nigerians, we must see that the fight against corruption is not just what we must leave for government alone. We must rise up in this country to demand that there should be sanity in this country. Now, if local government can get their funds to embark on development, how do you ensure development at the grassroots level? But you can see what has happened. So this is what has happened in the last 4 years. So government alone can't fight corruption. We, civil society, media, we have responsibility to build coalition around tackling corruption. And the most important thing about it is that institutions that are empowered to fight corruption in the country, they are constrained. And there are ethnic challenge, there's political party challenge, and there's this huge challenge about if at any point in time you want to take on fighting corruption, people can always look it from the lens of religion. And on that basis, it becomes a very huge challenge for the country. And so that's why I think that in the last 4 years, what are the things that this government have done very well? First, putting the issue of fighting corruption on the front burner is very good. But on the legislative aspect of it, because you need the anti-corruption infrastructure, like Professor, the ICP chairman rightly noted. Without the infrastructure, you can't fight corruption. Look the Proceed of Crime Bill, for example. Now, that bill has been in the National Assembly. No country around the world will allow that to happen. You've been using taxpayers' money to fight corruption, and then just to ask the National Assembly to pass this bill into law so that you can create the right infrastructure to tackle grand corruption, and then get the confidence of other international institutions to support you to retrieve the asset back to your country. We can pass this bill into law. But now we want to again raise this issue of that without the right framework, you can't fight corruption. It's not what you have to do by individual. You need the institution. And what are the institutions? You need the legislative framework. For example, when the government came up with the executive order 6, you can see the resistance to it. Who were resisting it? It's the political elite. And at any point in time, you want to fight corruption, either somebody is raising question of ethnicity or religion. That's not the issue. And that's why I agree completely with Professor, that what we need to be focusing on, when at any point in time you are arrested or you are asked to come and answer a question, do you commit the crime? That should be the basis, because there should be incentive to fighting corruption. This government won't fight their own corruption. They won't. If they come to power, if you are in the power and somebody raises questions about you, what you should be responding to is, did I commit the crime? That should be the question. And that's why at any point in time, when the issue of corruption is raised with any political elite, what do we do?
All right, David Igola, thank you very much there for your opening salvo. We'll return to you. Now, just to, my question is going to Professor Sadiq Rada, just to appreciate the task that Nigeria faces, not just the President Buhari challenge, as it were, with regard to dealing with corruption. Professor Wasoye and indeed all others have said that, look, corruption is systemic. And when you actually look at the ecology of corruption, you know, the cultural pressures, you know, the religious factor, the ethnic factor, just our attitude itself, how can we overcome those, if you like, those suppliers, you know, of the influences for corruption, so that we now have a mental mindset to say, look, at some point, listen, everybody will have to go back to square one, and then let's have a level playing field for all persons. Just to explain, not for purposes of you, because I know that you understand the question that I've asked, for the benefit of our viewers, why would it be that we celebrate persons who have made it big? Persons, you know, when persons are appointed into offices in government, you keep going to them for assistance, When you look at the paycheck of that person who is in government, from where do you expect him to give you assistance? You know, the person goes into government, he comes out, he doesn't have a bigger house, he doesn't look like he's a fool. He didn't do anything while he was in government. Are you with me? Yeah. And then you start building a house step by step. They will say, look, you have not finished your house. Look at, not Blessing necessarily, look at Blessing. 6 months, you know, look at the house that she has finished the house, look at the cars that he has. Whenever we ask you for money, it's always one wahala after the other. You never want to assist anybody.
Yeah.
Prof.
Well, you have asked me a question and you have answered the question. Thankfully enough, you have answered the question. Now, you see, we said we are religious as a people. Now, why don't we conform in tattoo to the religious tenets of our religious books? You know, since we say that we are Muslims or Christians, and these religions have said, do this, don't do that, why don't we conform to that? Secondly, if we really want to eradicate this idea of people glorifying materialism, then we have to undergo a lot of sensitization. You see, it is not enough to have wealth or resources, but it should matter to Nigerians how you get your resources. You know, it's not enough to have houses, shopping malls, hotels, etc., that you cannot explain. It is similar to certificates now. Many young people are becoming aware that it's not enough to have a certificate, but you should have a certificate that you are proud of.
And that you can defend.
A certificate you can defend. It's the same thing with this. Now we are happy because of the fight against corruption in this country. Many children have realized that their parents are crooks. So we should begin to intensify this effort that it's not no matter how you get your resources, you should be able to explain in public glad that I am proud of my resources and this is how I got it. Therefore, we have to challenge ourselves. We have to challenge those who have resources. And I have been telling young people that no matter how highly placed somebody is, once he is a crook, you should not respect such a person. I have said several times that Nigeria is a country where you have numerous old people, but you don't have elders. There is a world of difference between an old man and an elder. An elder is exemplary. An elder is a model. Is somebody you can copy. An old man has many years in life, but is a crook, is dubious, is somebody that you don't want to associate with. And we have many of them in positions of authority in Nigeria. Therefore, it's our duty as a people to show that crime does not pay. And there are many proactive and reactive ways you can use to ensure that crime does not pay. For example, ICPC is doing a lot to confiscate properties obtained through looting. That will send the signal. Then all the anti-corruption agencies have units to do with sensitization. While you are doing the reactive methods, you also go through the proactive methods to ensure that people become discouraged about accumulating what they cannot in any way explain or what they cannot be proud of. There are many people in Nigeria who have accumulated more than what they require in life. Therefore, we should ensure that as our children and young people are growing up, this concept of accumulation, is taken away from their mentality. Work hard, get what you need, get what you deserve, and be proud of whatever you are able to get through your sweat. And I think in this process, it will take time. But no matter how long it will take, it's worth doing. Because not doing it will have dire consequences for us today and in the future. Therefore, we must do it because it's a problem we have created ourselves. Therefore, nobody is going to solve it for us. We have to solve it ourselves. Nobody will come from another planet and say that Nigeria's problem is monumental. Therefore, it will be solved by some people from outside. No, we have to do our best. And doing our best will require using quite a number of approaches, including sensitization.
I'm wondering, thanks. I want to go back to Professor Owasonye, still on this subject matter. That's to say, the systemic root of corruption in the country, and therefore what we are trying to deal with by cutting off the branches. How do we address the root? Just one simple example, which I'm sure you must have heard. People will be complaining that under Buhari things are hard. There's no money, and you know what that means. That the usual stuff is not free. It's not going around. But is that occasioning also a change in approach to say, hey, listen, that free money is actually a source of our underdevelopment, and that you have to earn your keep?
I think that you just hit the nail on the head. For so long, we have been living false lives. Civil servants who have defined salary live above their means, and nobody asks questions. Some people have argued that, well, there's a whole chain, and the civil servant who is stealing money, he has a whole string of dependents behind him. But the truth of the matter is that he has undermined actually the future of the dependents. If you've stolen the money that will be used to build schools for them, build roads and all that, you want to become a little god or a little king unto them. And of course, it's not possible. So clearly, what was happening before was that we were all living on a false sense of stability and economic buoyancy. Recently, something had been trending where somebody said, whoever created this mirage that Nigeria is economically buoyant, and they were trying to compare the budgets of different countries vis-a-vis their population, saying, for example, a country with half the population of Nigeria. The budget is double that of Nigeria and all that. The truth, of course, is that we had also been stealing the opportunities for the future. Now, what the president has tried to do, and there's a lot of narrative about the borrowing and all that. Borrowing, people will tell you, is not the problem. It's what you use the money that you borrow for that is critical. If you use it for infrastructure that will generate income, create jobs, long term, you know, you will get the result. That's how other countries have developed. But you borrow money in this country before and you stole the money, you know, it's not put into productive use. You've already mortgaged the future. The unearned income of myself, my children, my grandchildren is already charged, you know, that they cannot pay off because the person who took the money had not reinvested it back into the system. So clearly, when people make those complaints that there's no money and all that, because somebody has chosen to be prudent. I said, this is the amount of money you have. This is how I'm going to use it. It will take a little while before people will accept that reality. Secondly, we're a culture that is very profligate. People go to parties, and you see the way they spray money. Ain't nobody even, if you work hard for your money, would you ever spend it like that? It's not possible. When you think of how much oil, midnight oil you've burned to earn this money, then you want to have an ostentatious marriage, burial, party. Every occasion is cause for celebration. And also people don't pay tax. The FRS said last year we raised about 5.3. Less than 20 million in the tax net. Okay? So there are all manner of factors that show that we were not realistic before. Now somebody is calling us to account and saying, pay your commensurate tax. Spend your money wisely. If we see you spending money anyhow, no wahala. We are entitled to ask you. If we find cars in your garage, we're entitled to ask you, where did this come? Especially if you're a public officer, it baffles me sometimes when anti-corruption agencies are prosecuting a public officer whose income from the day he was born, if he'd never spent one dime, is well known. And any court, anywhere in the world, and Nigeria is the only example I have, and I'm not trying to be modest, I try to check from other countries. People will ask you, please just answer this question. Your total income is $1,000 since you started working. Here is $1 million. Can you explain how? But here in this country, you can dance around. You never get the fellow to answer the question. You'll be dancing around the issue for 5 years. Where does it happen? A simple thing that can, one hearing in a country where they know what they are doing. They deal with the issue. They say, can you answer the question? They said you started working in 1980. This is 2019. You have $1 million. Your total salary since 1980 to date is $1,000. If you never spent it, can you please just explain one sentence? But we will allow, the lawyer will bring application. They will grant it. Adjourn 2 months. Lawyer will bring application. Adjourn 3 months. 5 years for one person to explain. Why won't others steal the money? So there are many things.
How do we break that chain?
Exactly.
How do we break that chain?
I think before Latin comes in, I think this government is already sending the signal that we're not going to let off. All of us have friends who are judges as well, our classmates. We all grew up in the economy. And I tell my friends, very close friends who are judges, and when we complain and are agonizing, I say, well, I'm not saying it's you that is the problem. But when you say your vehicle has not been changed in 4 years, the roof of your court is leaking, your salary has not been paid, I say it's in the pocket of the thieves. And as long as you or your colleagues tolerate them dancing around the issues, you don't get what you deserve. Just as I can't get what I deserve. But because you are a judge, you are in a dignified position, you cannot talk. You can only talk to friends, muted voices. I say, so when next they bring them before you, you don't tolerate shit. I'm sorry to use the expression.
All right, Latoda, how do we break that chain? How do we break that chain? I mean, because when they talk about grand corruption, monies are budgeted across all tiers of government, and we never get value for money.
Yes. Embedded in the Prof's explanation are ways by which the chain could be broken. When Professor Wada was talking as well, he talked about preventive and reactive measures. Part of the preventive measures is this issue of unexplained wealth. If you look at the legislations of both the ICPC and that of the FCC, both agencies have power to make certain applications. Like if you look at Section 7 of the FCC Act relating to special powers of the Commission, where we feel that your accumulated property is not commensurate with your lifestyle, certain applications could be made to court. And some of those things had been done in the past and are still being done. One illustrative case is that of the former First Lady of the country. A lot of people are aware of applications of non-conviction-based forfeiture that was made by the Commission in respect of certain wealths, amounts of money which were traced to accounts linked to her. Such applications too had been used in the case of the former Chief of Defense Staff, Alex Badi, in which a lot of unexplained wealth at the end of the day were forfeited to the federal government. So the chain is already being broken. Another measure of even breaking the chain, again, one could see it from the recent directive of the FIU in a bid to monitor the movement of money. But like Reverend Ugolo noted, one can see the gang up already. A policy which is actually noble in trying to curtail corruption is a preventive measure, that if this is done, this and this could be achieved. But before the policy is even implemented, already there's a lot of hula-baloo along the way. Then maybe I should bring into focus that for the first time in the history of this country, we have what is known as a National Anti-Corruption Strategy document, which has been passed by the Federal Executive Council for the first time. That is a roadmap which is supposed to guide the country. It's a multi-sectoral involving both the public and the private sector and all organs of government in the fight against corruption. So if this National Anti-Corruption Strategy document is implemented effectively, I'm sure along the way the country would get it right. So a lot is already being done and a lot will still be done. Like in the case of the Yahoo boys that I mentioned, and most of the positions that have been done, that of the two former governors of Taraba and Plateau State, part of the orders made by the court were restrictive orders that monies which were traceable to the account of these persons should be recovered and be returned back to the coffers of the respective state government. So basically, a lot is being done, and a lot is still going to be done along the way.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Latono. When we return from this break, because we're going on a break now, those other obstacles that are still frustrating the efforts, whether at the agency levels or what other process we need to take differently, we'll be finding out from you all after the break. And we already have reactions too from our viewers, so we'll get through to see some of them just after the break. Welcome back. Now we're on the final stretch for the conversation part of our program today. Let's get back to Benin, where we, of course, is still seated, Reverend David Ugolo. And part of the success story already you pointed out in your opening salvo about the return, or at least the Abacha loot, some of which has been dispensed here and there across the country, and we're kind of having a good feeling about that. And for those who still believe, okay, the fight should be further, asset recovery, of course, is one aspect of this anti-corruption fight. Where and how do we piece together what is bringing on this success story, and what other obstacles are still there, at least to borrow from, to use on the greater fight?
Thank you. I think first, like Prof said, crime must not pay. And, you know, the emphasis before now was get people arrested, take them to court, and sometimes it takes 20 years, 10 years to prosecute these people. I think the innovation around anti-corruption around the world is now going after the asset, and particularly against the background that will require more resources to finance development in developing countries. In the instance of Nigeria, we can see very clearly now that the $322.5 million recovered from the Abacha's family that is currently sitting in the Central Bank of Nigeria is going to finance the social investment in Nigeria as cash transfer for the poorest of the poor in Nigeria. And what is remarkable about this success story is that the Nigerian government when negotiating with the Swiss government, these are two sovereign governments, they didn't allow what used to happened. For example, in 2004 and 2005, when the first tranche of Abuja money was transferred to Nigeria, what happened to that money is still a story that sometimes when we went to monitor what the government claimed as at that time they used the money for, it's not something to write home about. There were schools government claimed that they built. When we visited the school, we couldn't find the school. And some road government claimed that those money were used for. We couldn't see the road. But in the Abuja 2 now, what has happened is that government signed an MOU with civil society. And the first time in history, we are assessing information how government is disbursing the money across the country. Now, are there problems? There is challenge, there's doubt. For example, the National Cash Transfer Office that is responsible for disbursement of this money have a grievance mechanism. The first time we went to Nasarawa, for instance, there were people who were complaining about not receiving the money. We brought this to the attention of the NCT office, and the first time in history, government is responding to some of these issues that were raised about how people came into the social register. And that, again, provides an entry point for people to see how government demonstrates commitment to the issue of transparency and accountability. But the real challenge is that when government recovered money and when they put it into development, and in the instance of these Abuja 2, how do they carry the people along? That's the issue. And you need to build trust. And as you know, every recovered asset from other jurisdictions, government need to demonstrate some level of transparency and accountability. And government need to build trust among the people. And that's why you can see that because government have been able to demonstrate that it can be open to citizens to monitor all recovered assets, particularly in the instance of the Abuja 2. Now, the negotiation that is going on in the Abuja 3 now, which is about $500 million that is coming from the U.S., now government have also opened up to say that they are going to engage civil society. For us, that again will send the strong signal. And that's how it all happened across the spectrum of anti-corruption fight in the country. What government need to do is to send the trust. If you don't send the trust, if you don't build the trust, people won't believe your anti-corruption fight. And so if government is sending this right message to the people by making sure that every recovered money from deposited outside this country return back to the country, people know what government is using the money for.
All right. Well, thank you very much there, David Ugolo. Let's take the tweets that have come in from our viewers using our Twitter handle at NTAGMN. Blessing, we'll begin with you.
Okay. There is one tweet from Mogbala Babs. It says, like the Vice President Oshiba just said recently, what the federal government has succeeded in curbing was a grand corruption where the Central Bank of Nigeria's vault was left open for all. Let's beam our searchlight on MDAs. Those are where the real corruption exists. The political class can't do it without the connivance with civil servants.
Now, Dele Jack Solomon has this tweet. The Buhari-led government is fighting corruption, no doubt, but he needs to do more. This government must also get rid of corrupt elements amongst his fold.
From Omen at Omen Kakalu 1 is the Twitter handle. Corruption is a cankerworm to development and must be separated from politics. Prevention is the best approach.
All right, another one from Dilek Jack Solomon. It is now time for systems to be devised to tackle corruption at the state and local government levels.
Corruption is a disease. That's still from... Okay, well, Dele, you have several of your tweets here. Okay, let's take the one from Musa Mohammed Hadija. Fighting corruption in the country has gone up and down as the high-ranking officers working with corrupt people, working with corrupt people at their right hand, and also anti-corrupts at the left-hand side. So
okay, Law Alpha C tweet says, sanitizing the judiciary remains an onerous task before this administration in its efforts to flush out corrupt practices.
Akeju Olagbaju tweets, no doubt success have been recorded. This is the first time we can boast of a leader that is acknowledged, not corrupt. The success could be better if he has like minds to surround him. And we redefine the true meaning. If someone steals, let's stigmatize him as a thief.
And then Samuel Major has this tweet. It says, what measures is the EFCC taking to arrest and prosecute corrupt politicians, especially lawmakers and some governors who have refused to conduct local government elections?
Otis Zokpia says, in developed world, arrests are made based on available evidence and the possibility for prosecution and conviction. We are yet to see politicians put in jail despite glaring facts.
And this is from Titus Monday. It says, corruption should not be a one-sided fight. It should be fought with the utmost dexterity and energy, and anyone found culpable, no matter the political affiliation, should be made to face the full wrath of the law, even though the laws to me are very mild. The Chinese example should be adopted.
Mike Kanyako tweets, the war against corruption by the present regime is on course, but we must be bold to say that all those excesses and impunity associated with previous regime have disappeared. But the concern by many is on the politicians with corrupt cases that decamp from one party to the other.
And this is coming from Joseph. That's the Twitter handle, Joseph. It says, fighting corruption is good under the present administration, but the president should please use the money recovered to resuscitate companies that folded up in order to create employment and not just keep them in the bank. All right, so those are the tweets that we have in the meantime, a number of points that they have also raised. I'm just wondering, gentlemen, and my colleague, Blessing, Professor Wasoye made some points along with the other guests, of course, to say, look, you have a very vocal minority that, tries to drown out the fight against corruption, whether sensitization or otherwise. And they are the ones who also say, okay, no matter what the case is, we're going to try and frustrate it. I'm just wondering, looking again at the incidents of corruption, whether past or present, that vocal minority would, of course, represent the Nigerian elite class. From the examples that you have seen elsewhere on the African continent, it baffles a number of observers why an elite class, such as we have in Nigeria, would deliberately steal their own resources and take them out elsewhere. Do we have such examples elsewhere on the African continent? What motivates them? I mean, what would motivate you to just download your treasury and then the next thing, you ship out and you are seeing sickening poverty within your environment? At the meantime, you go out from once in a while to go and cool off, and then you come back to the country. How can we deal with that elite malaise?
Okay. First of all, I think is that it's a realization that they recognize the effect, both immediate and long-term, of what they have done. So you steal the resources, but you don't keep it within jurisdiction because you know it can be recovered. You want to keep it as far away as possible. That's number one. Number two, you recognize that what you have stolen has undermined the future and development of that place. So you position yourself to be able to move if you need to move. And then you prepare your children to, study abroad and all that. So all of these are indications that they recognize the effect of what they have done. How can we mitigate some of these factors? That's why I think that part of our communication and strategy in terms of public enlightenment must be to communicate the opportunity cost of corruption, to let you know that that man from your village that you are defending, sowing Ashwebi and following to court, is the reason why your town or your village is the way that it is. And we have to be painstaking about it. We have to be very painstaking about it. We need to be able to show that this is what this fellow did. He got a chance, but he virtually stole your collective commonwealth. He's undermined. So you will wake up in the morning and go and queue up in his house instead of having had a chance for education to be able to compete with his children. That's number one. Number two, I think that going forward, we must review the strategy. Part of what we must do is a mix, and it must be broadly mixed. We must not ignore sanctions and enforcement. We recognize and realize that over the years, focusing only on prosecuting with an intention of sending to jail takes you forever because of constitutional safeguards. And thieves who have not given the public and their victims a chance of any constitutional safeguard, they are the first to ask for safeguard. You've stolen a lot of money. You did not think about the future of the people you stole the money from, that you have indirectly killed them. But when you are arrested, you say you are innocent. You say presumption of this, presumption of that. They are very good, and they have lawyers who line up behind them. Even though I'm happy to know that the number of lawyers lining up behind them is also diminishing. That's a good signal. Then the third point is that we must emphasize that you can't account for it, we take it first. We need to continue to do that. Globally is the trend, because they know that thieves and criminals will try to exploit. We must escalate preventive measures, especially by using technology to diminish the capacity. Now, once you minimize the number of cash transactions that people can do, everything else is a trail. Everything else is a trail. We must go there. This government must put its foot down. All MDAs must get on the electronic government platform for payments and all that. Whoever you are paying, what you are paying for, time you are paying, it must be seen.
Okay.
So that it can be tracked. Otherwise,
that would be.
I think in addition to what he has said, we need to, since people are taking resources abroad, then there is this platform of under GIFA and many other fora to have mutual legal assistance, so that a crime here is a crime there. And currently Nigeria is working hard to have as many broad agreements and understandings with countries, especially where looters in Nigeria take their so-called property, so that we can have an understanding of easy recovery.
One more cooperation do we need to push internationally?
Yes, okay. Yes, it's been done.
Okay, Mr. Latson.
Corruption is an aspect of economic and financial crime. The objective of the offender in economic and financial crime is to obtain wealth illegally. So the first thing you can do is to deprive him of that illegitimate wealth. So like Prof noted, the focus, just like government is doing, should be on asset recovery. And that is why the Commission is essentially making use of the non-conviction-based forfeiture these days. And we see it achieving a lot of objectives. Okay. Since they are focusing on distorting the criminal prosecution, once you take away the wealth from them, you even reduce the ability to be able to hire the normal lawyers they get that stop prosecution.
Well, how then do you deal with allegations of victimization or political targeting?
Can I address that very quickly before Belaon comes in? Somebody had said that politicians of the current government and all that, if you are so well connected that you are not prosecuted under Buhari, it won't go away. Some of the people who have just been convicted now, they didn't commit the crime under Buhari. They committed the crime 3 governments back. But once the thing is there, be rest assured it won't go away. And I always tell people, you can delay it, but you can't deny it. Exactly. So if you are so well, you move from this party to that party, you lobby yourself, you get into government, you get appointed a minister, you get to senator, fine, you're only delaying. Sooner or later, you will answer.
So institutions must be strong.
The institutions will be strong, and you will answer. It's just, that's all you can achieve, nothing more.
Okay, quickly, let's take the final word from Reverend David Ugolo in Benin. Briefly, please, very brief.
The real key issue is shifting the burden of proof. And I think what the ICPC, EFCC are now doing in the country is a right signal, and we must encourage them, we must support them, and they're doing a great work, is to shift the burden. You have to prove you are the owner of the asset. The idea that, oh, because I belong to PDP or I belong to APC or because I'm a Yoruba or because I'm a Igbo should not arise. And Nigerians should support this institution. We must continue to fight them. And then what NFIU have done to ensure that monthly allocation gets to the local government across the country, Nigerians should rise up. We must not allow the 36th governor to undermine Nigerians. And the president must also take it as a priority. The ministers is going to announce in his second tenure, we send the right signal. If we announce people with the capacity, people with the integrity, it will send the right signal. It will help to strengthen the confidence of Nigeria. And the president must also take note, those who becomes leaders in this country must also respect what he does.
Executive Director, African Network for Environment and Economic Justice, that's Anti-Corruption and Asset Recovery, Reverend David Ugolo. Thank you very much. He joined us from our Benin Center. We'd also like to appreciate Professor Bolajo Owasoye, Chairman ICPC. Thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you for inviting
Appreciation
me.
also to Professor Sadiq Rada, that's Executive Secretary, Presidential Advisory Committee on Anti-Corruption. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And certainly, appreciation too will be going to Kabir Latono, Assistant Director, Legal Department, EFCC. Thank you so much for joining us, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Okay, time now for a quick look into what the sports world is offering us.
Nigeria's Flying Eagles have landed in Poland for this year's FIFA Under-20 World Cup after rounding off a 3-week residential training at Bad Kroging on the outskirts of Munich, Germany on Saturday. The team flew out of Germany via Munich on Sunday morning for the final leg of preparation for the 2019 FIFA Under-20 World Cup that starts on 23rd of May. While in Bad Kroging, the team played 4 friendly games. The team was boosted by a visit to the camp on Thursday by President of the Nigeria Football Federation, Mr. Amaju Melvin Pinnick, NFF General Secretary Dr. Mohamed Sanusi, and Super Eagles Technical Advisor Gennard Raw. Nigeria will start her FIFA Under-20 World Cup campaign on 24th May against Group D foes Qatar, before other duels against USA and Ukraine. In tennis, Rafael Nadal claimed his first title of the year by defeating world number 1 Novak Djokovic 6-love, 4-6, 6-1 in the Italian Open final in Rome. The Spaniard raced through the opener in 39 minutes, the first 6-love between the great rivals in 141 previous sets. Djokovic battled back, but in the Rome sunshine, Nadal sealed his 9th Italian Open title in 2 hours and 25 minutes.
It's a 9th title for Rafa in Rome and a record-breaking 34th Masters 1000 trophy for the Spaniard. He ends his wait.
It was his 81st tournament win, and it takes him 34-33 ahead of Djokovic in Masters 1000 series titles.
All right, thank you very much for the stories there on the sports scene. Of course, that's the king of clay, Rafael Nadal, back on top against Novak Djokovic. But just to underscore the fact that in their head-to-head, Djokovic continues to lead 28-26. We'll look out for them at the French Open later on this month. Let's go over now to our foreign desk.
U.S. President Donald Trump has issued a stern warning to Iran, suggesting it will be destroyed if a conflict breaks out between both countries. The U.S. has deployed additional warships and planes to the Gulf in recent days, but Mr. Trump's statement marks a shift in tone after recent attempts to downplay the possibility of military conflict. Only a matter of days ago, the president told aides that he did not want U.S. pressure on Iran to turn into a conflict. Iran has also moved to talk down concerns over the escalating tensions. The country's foreign minister has insisted that there was no appetite for war. Elsewhere, the military and leaders of the protests in Sudan have resumed talks on the composition of a future transitional sovereign council. Negotiations were earlier suspended by the military council as they demanded the removal of the barricades installed by demonstrators in Khartoum.
Well, at the Vienna Fashion Week in Austria, Nigerians created a new norm on the runway. Let's see Olalade Alayaki's talk on that.
video of the dancers has since gone viral on social media with over 80,000 views and is
Yeah, very interesting. I just hope that as we are trying to revive our cotton, textile, and garment industry, that the fabrics will actually be sourced from here, because Austria used to be one of the major sources of lace material. Some of them, they look like singlets, but I don't know.
Very rich. Very rich. Oh, that's Good Morning Nigeria for today. We appreciate your company. Tomorrow is another time to join us for a fresh edition. My name is Blessing Abu. Thank you for watching.
And I'm Kingsley Osagalo. That's, as you said, the program is back tomorrow, same time, 7 o'clock in the morning. Until then, do enjoy the rest of the day.